For 17 years, one daytime show sold America a single promise: kindness, dancing in the aisles, free cars for families who needed them. And that closing line, repeated night after night, that became a kind of cultural shorthand for decency itself. Be kind to one another. The Ellen DeGeneres Show debuted in 2003 and, within a few seasons, had turned its host into something close to a national mascot for niceness. Advertisers loved her. Daytime Emmy voters loved her. And for a long time, so did the viewers who tuned in expecting warmth on tap. But by the time the show finally left the air in 2022 after 19 seasons, that image had been thoroughly dismantled, not by a rival network or a jealous competitor, but by the show's own staff, its own guests, and eventually, by people inside Hollywood who decided the silence wasn't worth protecting anymore. Comedian Rob Schneider became one of the loudest of those voices, and what he said didn't just pile onto old tabloid rumors. It reframed the entire scandal as something bigger than one host having a bad temper. It called out the machine that protected her. This is the story of how that machine worked, how it broke, and why Schneider's comments landed as hard as they did. Ask anyone who worked in the lower rungs of a major daytime production in the 2010s, and they'll tell you the same thing. The gap between what's on camera and what happens in the hallway can be enormous. On The Ellen Show, former staffers who eventually spoke to reporters described a workplace where unspoken rules governed how junior employees were supposed to behave around the host. Rules about not approaching her casually, about staying out of her eye line, about treating any interaction with real caution. Meanwhile, the celebrities booked as guests experienced something entirely different. A 5-star treatment designed to produce exactly the kind of warm, viral moment the show was famous for. That gap between how power was treated and how labor was treated became the through line of everything that followed. It wasn't really a story about one person having an off day. It was a story about what happens when a production becomes so profitable and so beloved that almost nobody around it has an incentive to say anything is wrong. 4 years, that arrangement held. The show was a moneymaker for Telepictures and Warner Brothers, a ratings powerhouse in a daytime landscape that was otherwise shrinking, and it kept collecting industry honors for its charitable segments. None of that made the private complaints disappear, it just made them harder to hear. It took a global disruption to finally expose what insiders had known for years. When COVID-19 shut down television production across Los Angeles in the spring of 2020, staff on The Ellen Show, like staff on nearly every live production, were left waiting for answers about pay, safety, and job security. As the show adapted to remote broadcasting, longtime crew members felt sidelined in ways that widened an already existing rift between the people who worked the show and the people who ran it. That tension didn't stay contained. In July 2020, BuzzFeed News published an investigation built on interviews with more than a dozen former employees, many of whom described a workplace defined by intimidation, unpredictable firings, and a climate of fear that had nothing to do with the "Be Kind" branding plastered across the set. Some described being let go after taking medical leave or attending family emergencies. Others detailed a broader pattern of racial insensitivity and mistreatment that had gone unaddressed for years. What made the story land as hard as it did wasn't just the specifics, it was the timing. The world was in lockdown, people were paying closer attention to labor conditions everywhere, and a show that had spent 2 decades branding itself as the nicest thing on television was suddenly facing the exact opposite reputation. The fallout escalated quickly. Additional reporting named 3 top executive producers, Ed Glavin, Kevin Lehman, and Jonathan Norman, as central figures in the alleged mistreatment, with former staff describing inappropriate conduct and a culture where complaints rarely made it anywhere near the host herself. Warner Media launched a formal internal investigation, and by August 2020, all 3 men had been removed from the production. When the show returned that fall for its 18th season, DeGeneres opened with an on-air apology, acknowledging that things had happened on her watch that shouldn't have. Reaction to that apology split hard. Some viewers accepted it as sincere. Many former employees and industry observers saw it differently, as an attempt to route accountability toward the fired executives, while the host herself avoided direct responsibility for the environment that had let the behavior continue. 4 years. Staff testimony is one thing, but it was 2 on-camera moments, one from 2019, one resurfaced from over a decade earlier, that made the public start rewatching old interviews with new eyes. In November 2019, actress Dakota Johnson appeared on the show and was met with a joke from DeGeneres suggesting she hadn't been invited to Johnson's birthday party. Johnson didn't play along. She corrected the host on camera, explaining she had, in fact, extended the invitation. DeGeneres just hadn't shown up. It was a small, almost mundane correction. But it happened in real time, without the practiced ease guests usually bring to these exchanges, and the clip spread fast. For the first time, a mainstream audience watched a guest push back against the host's version of events instead of laughing along. That moment sent people digging through the archive, and they found plenty. A 2008 interview with Mariah Carey resurfaced, in which DeGeneres handed Carey a glass of champagne on air while pregnancy rumors were swirling, an attempt, many felt watching it back, to pressure a visibly uncomfortable Carey into confirming the story live. Carey later said the moment upset her deeply, and the pregnancy ended in a miscarriage shortly afterward. Clips like these, alongside other resurfaced segments where guests seemed pushed further than they wanted to go, built a pattern that was hard to unsee once it had been pointed out. A show whose entire brand rested on making guests look spontaneously delighted, built in part on moments where discomfort was the actual engine of the segment. Publicists reportedly grew more cautious about booking clients on the show as this pattern became public, wary of a format that could turn a routine promotional stop into a viral embarrassment. By the time DeGeneres attempted her comeback in 2024, the standard industry etiquette would have called for silence. Comedians and performers rarely take direct public shots at a former daytime powerhouse, in part because doing so can carry real professional risk. That etiquette is exactly what Rob Schneider broke. In September 2024, Schneider appeared on The Megyn Kelly Show, where he and Kelly directly took on the framing DeGeneres had adopted for her Netflix comedy special, For Your Approval, the idea that she'd effectively been run out of Hollywood, or cancelled, for being mean. Kelly was blunt about the contradiction, pointing out that landing a major streaming platform and a reported 8-figure payday for a stand-up special is not what getting cancelled actually looks like. Schneider brought something different to the conversation: first-hand experience. A 3-decade veteran of the industry and former Saturday Night Live cast member, he spoke from his own history working around DeGeneres, saying he understood that hiding her sexuality for years before coming out publicly in the 1990s had likely left real, lasting resentment, and that he'd sensed that resentment firsthand. But he was careful to separate understanding where anger comes from excusing what it becomes when it isn't addressed. Left to fester, he argued, that kind of unresolved grievance can curdle into behavior that hurts people who have no power to push back, namely, junior staff. What made Schneider's comments resonate wasn't just the specific criticism. It was the broader point he and Kelly kept circling back to: a comedian who built a career on making other people the joke, without ever really turning that same scrutiny inward, isn't showing the kind of humility that would make a comeback land. Schneider didn't frame this as a personal takedown so much as a diagnosis of a much larger Hollywood pattern, where certain performers are shielded by their box office value or cultural capital long after ordinary accountability would have ended someone else's career, while others, without that same protection, are dropped over a single misstep. That's the part that turned Schneider's comments into more than just another celebrity dig. He wasn't only talking about Ellen DeGeneres. He was describing a system. For Your Approval was billed as DeGeneres' final word on everything that had happened, her farewell special, and by extension, her explanation. Instead of directly addressing the specific allegations that had come from her own staff, the special leaned heavily into personal narrative. The idea that she'd been unfairly branded as mean and pushed out of an industry that once adored her. For a lot of viewers, that framing didn't sit well, and the reaction underlined exactly what critics like Schneider and Kelly had already pointed out. A multimillion-dollar streaming deal, a sold-out theater tour, and a story about a sprawling estate don't read as the hallmarks of someone who's actually been exiled. The special spent real time on DeGeneres' personal lifestyle and her frustrations about losing her daytime platform, which only widened the gap between her experience and the experience of the working-class production assistants and crew members whose complaints had started the whole reckoning in the first place. Former staffers who had spoken out in 2020 were quick to note that the show didn't end because of a bad news cycle or hurt feelings. It ended because of a documented pattern of mistreatment that took years and a global pandemic to finally surface. Framing that history as a simple case of being too mean sidestepped the substance of what had actually been alleged. Rather than repairing her public standing, the special mostly reinforced the sense that the underlying issues had never really been reckoned with. To understand why it took this long for any of this to become public, it helps to understand a concept longtime industry veterans sometimes describe informally as the sacred cow, a performer or property so commercially valuable that the standard rules of workplace accountability effectively stop applying to them. The Ellen Show generated enormous, reliable revenue in syndication for years. For a media company, that kind of consistency is rare and extremely valuable, and it buys a level of institutional protection that ordinary employees never get. On top of the financial argument, DeGeneres carried real cultural weight as a trailblazer. Her decision to come out publicly on her sitcom in the late 1990s, at real professional risk, had earned her genuine respect that outlasted decades of subsequent controversy and functioned, whether intentionally or not, as a kind of reputational shield whenever complaints did surface. That combination, big money plus goodwill built on a real, historic milestone, created an environment where studio executives, talent representatives, and much of the entertainment press had every incentive to look past internal complaints and essentially no incentive to investigate them. Junior staff, meanwhile, understood implicitly that going to the press could end their careers before they'd really started. What eventually broke that arrangement wasn't a competitor or a network decision. It was the changing media landscape itself. The rise of independent outlets, along with platforms that let former staffers speak directly to large audiences without needing traditional press gatekeepers to sign off, meant that for the first time, the people at the bottom of the production had a way to bypass the very system that had been built to keep them quiet. Once that story got out, no amount of institutional goodwill could put it back. By late 2024, DeGeneres and her wife of 2 decades, actress Portia de Rossi, had sold their California properties and relocated to England's Cotswolds, a decision DeGeneres has said was tied both to her desire to step back from the entertainment industry and to her reaction to the outcome of the 2024 U.S. presidential election. She's spoken publicly about the move, describing the transition to a quieter, more rural life with genuine enthusiasm, even as the couple's early months in England came with real friction, pushback from local planning authorities over renovations, and, according to later reporting, a period in 2025 during which they found the slower pace of English country life more isolating than they'd expected. That restlessness reportedly contributed to reports the couple was considering a return to the United States, and by 2026, they had indeed purchased a Montecito, California estate, while continuing to maintain a presence in the Cotswolds. It's a life that looks almost nothing like the one DeGeneres spent nearly 2 decades building on a studio soundstage. No live audience, no daily broadcast, no writer's room, just gardening, horses, and a much slower rhythm than daytime television ever allowed. Whether that represents a genuine retreat from public life or simply a pause before another attempt at a comeback is something only time will answer. What's already clear is that the version of Ellen DeGeneres who once closed every broadcast with a plea for kindness left the industry with her legacy fundamentally split in two, the trailblazing television icon many still credit her for being, and the boss whose staff spent years too afraid to say what they were actually experiencing. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Was Ellen DeGeneres simply a uniquely difficult person who got what she deserved, or was she a visible symptom of a Hollywood system that still, today, protects its most profitable stars the exact same way it protected her for 2 decades? Rob Schneider didn't just criticize one host. He named a pattern that outlasts any single scandal. Whether the industry actually changes because of it is a different question entirely. What do you think? Drop your take in the comments, and if you want more breakdowns like this one, stick around for the next video.